we do have some who do work with public sector. That's only with councils who are accredited with us mostly.
Yeah.
So obviously who pay it. But, it's not a.
We had a load of fringes.
Yeah, sure.
Should we crack on? I feel like the referee waving at both goalkeepers at both ends. So check them ready. Right, order, yes. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming to this fringe organised by the Future Social Care Coalition. It's very good to see so many people here. And obviously particularly welcome to our extraordinary panel, which I will introduce in a minute. There are, as many of you I see have sensibly observed, refreshments available, and they will still be there at the end of the meeting if you haven't already got your dinner sorted out. I should warn you, in the meeting is being recorded in case anyone plans to say anything untoward or shouldn't be here for some reason, wants to go. You can, if you like, and indeed we encourage you to tweet using the hashtag Let's Get Social Care Done. It's full of capital letters on my version, but I won't read it out in full, otherwise that will be the evening gone. And if you want to find out more about the Future Social Care Coalition, you can download using the QR code, which is decorating the walls in an attractive way. As you see, we've got a panel stuffed full of both quality and quantity. I'll go for
Decide which you are.
Careful.
Yes. I feel I'm treading a fine line here. Let me go from left to right. Councillor Izzi Seccombe, one of the great figures of local government, who has huge expertise in this area. Next to her, on my left, is Chris Woodhead from Dimensions. Then Teresa Exelby of Community Integrated Care. To my immediate right, the new, and congratulations again, Minister for Social Care, Gillian, Keegan. Auto and Fan Club, very good. Sebastian, Bachelier of, well, that's very good, of the Living Wage Foundation, and my colleague Kevin Hollinrake, again, who I think, are you still on, no, you're not on the Select Committee anymore. No, but you were, you were operative on the Health and Social Care Select Committee and a member of the APPG on adult social care. So what we will do is we will obviously hear from all our panellists first, and then we will have a Q&A session. Ideally, because of our sponsors, who I'll mention later, and to say thank you to, and the general attitude of the Future Social Care Coalition, it would be good if we could try and not, as it were, rerun the debate about how you raise the money for social care. That's a hugely important debate, but we sort of had a couple of weeks ago and will no doubt run on. But nevertheless, one of the focuses of the coalition is about how we basically treat the workforce properly so that we can attract both a larger and better paid workforce. So that, I hope, will be the focus of much of our discussion this evening. But having said that, in the way of chairman, I now lose all control as I hand over to the panel. So first, can I ask Gillian, you to start?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Obviously, actually, my title is the Minister for Social Care and Mental Health. And the role also includes integration. And I think it's important to say that, because I think a lot of what we need to really do, and the reform that Sajid was talking about actually on the stage before, is really getting that integration piece right, because that will start to get a more sensible system, at least, that we can obviously make more stable, and then of course build on top of that the professionalisation of the workforce. When I first became an MP in 2017, one of the first things I did actually was set up the APPG for the professionalisation of the social care workforce with Louise Haigh, who is a Labour MP for Sheffield Heeley. And the reason I did this is, first of all, one of my very good friends from many, many years ago from Knowsley, where I grew up, has been in the care sector all her entire life and actually runs a care home, and a small one. And she has educated me very much on the working practices, the conditions, and also really how precarious actually some aspects of the work was. So I looked very much, you know, I've worked so long in business, I've worked for nearly 30 years before becoming an MP, and without people and without investing in your people, training your people, focusing on retention of your people, and overall recognition of your people, as well as fair wages, etc., you don't really have a business, and that applies to pretty much anything that you do. It applies probably double to something like health and social care, because you definitely don't have without the people. And the people obviously make all the difference, and make all the difference to everybody who's resident in a care home or has somebody coming into their home to look after them. So there was a couple of things that were really clear at the time, and I don't think they've changed much. The first was there was massive vacancy rate, there was massive churn, there was a lot of training and retraining, and there wasn't that much of a transferable currency in terms of the qualifications. The status of the role, I think, has changed. Actually, that's probably something that has changed a lot vis-a-vis the pandemic, but it certainly wasn't understood or viewed perhaps in the same way as some of the ones in the health service were. And the other thing that struck me, and this is something that I've been on 4 visits in my first 2 weeks as care and mental health minister, and this is still the case, is the amount of 0-hour contracts in a industry that has got that pattern with high number of vacancies and a high number of churn makes 0 sense. It makes 0 sense. And what is happening is a lot of the risk of trying to schedule things, and I understand why it happens. It's because of the way the councils buy and the sort of minute by minute and all of the things that are wrong in the way the system works, or let's just say under-optimised in the way the system works. But what that leads to in many cases is actually the risk all going to the person who is actually employed on the front line, and that's just wrong. And I've said this now a number of times. I was talking to a care worker, domiciliary care worker, who basically he said to me he had 4 clients, and 2 of them had gone into hospital, one with a urinary infection, another one after a fall. And the fact that he only had 2 clients that week instead of 4 clients was his issue to deal with. So he's on relatively low pay anyway. And when his wages halved that week because of nothing to do with him, he had to take the risk of that. Well, that's just unacceptable. If you're in low paid work, even if you're highly valued, if it's insecure, you don't have the luxury of keeping the role, because everybody needs that security. You know, everyone has bills to pay and you need the security. So there's a lot of things, I think, that haven't moved at all, and I look forward to, as part of the reforms, as to really looking at what we should be doing, both in terms of qualifications, training, transferable skills. They're highly skilled, a lot of these jobs, but you wouldn't think so if you read a lot of the job description. And actually a lot of the things that the care workers are doing, people take for granted, and actually a lot of it's akin to nursing in a lot of cases as well. And in fact, in some cases, they're training other people how to help with some of this stuff. So I think we've got some money in the system. We'll start. I'm sure everybody here is going to say it's not enough, but you know, you start where you start, and that's what I've learned in life, and you have to build the case afterwards. I think there's a lot we can do. I really look forward to doing it, because it's something that I think is more and more important to me. All of us have had people in the care system, and in my case, my grandmothers both died with dementia. It's really, it's so vital. Everyone really relies on these people that you don't know, that are there looking after your most precious family members, and that's also working age adults as well. And it's very, very, very important that we stabilise and we really build up and professionalise the workforce in the sector. So I look forward to working with everyone in the room to do that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Gillian. Let's move straight on to Teresa from Community Integrated Care.
Thank
Teresa.
you. Thank you for having me. I guess what I'm hoping to do today is bring to life a bit of perspective and context around what it's feeling like within social care at the moment, and especially on the front line. Earlier this year, we published a report that showed that colleagues working in social care earn 39% less than colleagues working in the equivalent size role with the equivalent skills in any other public funded role, whether that be within the NHS or whether it be within local authorities or actually other charity sectors. That 39% is equivalent to £7,000 a year take-home pay. What that means for our colleagues, what it means for them today, is a level of financial hardship. And that financial hardship we have experienced leads to levels of mental health, anxiety, depression, concern. We've seen colleagues with homelessness. We are supporting colleagues in addition to food banks to be able to feed their families. And over the last 2 years, we've spent just under £200,000 giving colleagues grants of support to enable them to get through. So it's no massive surprise with that gap in their pay that there's quite a significant churn in the retention of people within social care. And we're looking at 34% at the moment as a sector, which is twice as much as you would find in other kind of key roles at the front line. So why should we pay more for colleagues in social care? Well, I don't think we've ever, a bit like you said, Gillian, I don't think we've ever seen a functioning social care sector. We've never seen one without this rotation of staff that are going in and out. We've never seen one where all of our days, our managers and our service leaders are taken up in recruiting and inducting and training new staff and making sure that they can do the job. Now, social care already contributes £46 billion to the economy within the UK. And I truly believe that social care can be both a social and an economic driver for the UK. I guess the question I would ask is, well, why don't you in community integrated care make that happen then? Because you're a big organisation. Well, our customers are local authorities and they are cash strapped and we have to fight and negotiate with them just to get the rises for the national minimum wage when that comes through. So that's really tricky. We end up in a position really where there are some local authorities that we are subsidising to be able to deliver care, and that isn't for charity a sustainable way of working. So if we need to now invest in pay to make sure that we can retain some of our staff because they can get easier jobs at Amazon or easier jobs in Costa Coffee, then that means we're not going to be investing in housing, in technology, in all of the innovative things that need to come to a social care sector that can really smash it and really do the job that it's there to do. I think today, right now, as I sit here with 512 vacancies that I am trying to fill, we need to understand the extent of where the crisis is. It's not visible like fuel pumps, but I anticipate within the next 8 to 12 weeks, it will become very visible in terms of a burden on the NHS. Because people that need this level of support that cannot access it because the people are not there to give it will end up within the NHS, and they'll end up receiving the wrong kind of care actually, because that isn't what the NHS is there for. Or their family will give up their jobs so that they can care for their most loved ones. So fundamentally, colleagues are leaving us, and we don't have a lot of time, I don't think, to resolve the situation we're in. We do need fair pay. We can't live with one sector being so significantly underpaid compared to others. We do need professionalisation of the workforce, that's really important, and we need an aspirational career so that working in social care can be a career of aspiration rather than a choice of last resort.
Thank you very much, Teresa. And let's move straight on to Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Damian. Kevin Hollinrake, Member of Parliament for Thirsk and Malton. I've sat on 2 select committee inquiries in looking at social care. It was the Select Committee for Housing, Communities and Local Government I sat on actually, but the second inquiry we did was a joint inquiry with the Health Select Committee as well, so 24 members of Parliament sat on that committee. what we saw in those committee sessions, the evidence and the report we wrote, is that workforce is absolutely critical to this conversation. There's two key things I'm missing, and I'm sorry not to stick entirely to the chair's brief here, but one is framework, career framework, absolutely making this more professional in terms of how the career progression could work as a social care worker, to give people that stickability and feeling that they're in a profession. But also the other issue is funding. You can't do the stuff that we need to do for social care without the money. That's absolutely fundamental to it. The first thing I'd really like to say about the whole thing, of course, is after the year and a half we've been through, is the incredible bravery of the 1.5 million people who work in adult social care. What they must have gone through, both in terms of the physical impact, and 1,000 health and social care workers have died, of course, of COVID. It's a terrible statistic. 1.5 million people, I mean, that's an incredible statistic as well, but 1,000 people. I think as a health or social care worker, you are twice as likely to die of COVID than any other profession. So phenomenal bravery from the people who kept going back into the front line, caring for people, putting their own lives at risk. It's quite extraordinary. And the impact that had on their physical well-being as well as their mental health must have been extraordinary for many. I've got to say the solutions to this, in terms of the funding element, in terms of the pay, which is critical, I don't believe are about simply the government specifying these are the rates of pay. The vast majority of people who work in social care are employed by private sector businesses. I don't think it's the government's job to dictate to private sector businesses what you pay, other than I'm a massive fan of the national living wage and also massive fan of the real living wage, which Sebastian will talk about shortly in a second. In terms of the framework, the career progression, certainly this sector has been seen as a poor relation compared to healthcare, there's no doubt about it. Really welcome the government's announcement on funding, but also in terms of professionalisation of the whole sector. The white paper that's coming forward later this year will include that framework, that career framework, and just picking out some of the quotes from that, from the initial announcement around that in the Build Back Better paper, looking for a qualified, skilled workforce, make it a more rewarding vocation, career development with new skills, plan to support professional development, £500 million, of course, for training, certification, all these things that will really help professionalise the sector. So that's a good starting point. Clearly, we all want to see the detail in the white paper that should be out later this year. What we learned from the Select Committee inquiry is really we did go out to Germany to look at the German system, and it's a lot of the stuff we talk about in Parliament and many of us talk about, including Damian and I and stuff, lots of it is based upon other international experiences, and I think a sensible thing to do to look at other countries' experiences rather than try and design a new scheme from scratch, completely from scratch. But the Germans always seem to do things pretty well, annoyingly. And but their system actually wasn't integrated. There was still a healthcare system and a social care system. They just work together very well. So I don't think you need to have a completely combined system for this to work. But just in terms of the funding, and the government has stepped forward now with a social care package, of course, a health and social care levy, which is in many ways along the lines of the German system. They moved to a system back in 1995 away from our kind of system, a local authority funded system, to a social insurance type system, which is in payment terms is pretty similar. There is 1.175% of earnings from employer and from the employee, so pretty similar to what the 1.25 that we've suggested, which should be put in. The big concern I have about that is it's supposed to be a hypothecated levy. Hypothecated in terms of totally ring-fenced for what was initially social care. Okay, that was how it was initially mooted, social care. Now, the Treasury has a terrible record, and I'm not talking about this particular Chancellor or any other Chancellor, but a terrible record of hypothecating taxes. So you look at road fund licence, for example, or vehicle excise levy is a good example. That used to be just to pay money into the roads. Tax on tobacco used to pay money for treatment for people with tobacco-related diseases. And, of course, over time, they get pushed into all the other sectors. So I'm worried about the hypothecation element of that. But one critical part of the German system that I think we've ignored so far that works really well is that what you can do when you're defined as needing social care is you can choose to have care provided by an organisation, by a provider, charitable or private or whatever, or you can choose to draw that down money, like a budget, if you like, which we have here, of course, to some extent, not to a great extent. So you can then pay that money to a relative, to a neighbour, a loved one who can provide that care. Now, I'm not saying which is right or which is wrong, but many people really want the social part. The social care is the social part of social care they really want. Somebody they really know and trust to provide that care. So I would like to see that as a key part of the system, which can improve some of the workforce capacity issues we know exist. So I think we really need to focus on that moving forward. But so two key elements, well, three key elements, I say. A, making sure this hypothecated levy is really hypothecated for social care. If it is not, we're in serious trouble, because the money will not flow through to the system, through to wages that we know is a key issue. And you've got 110,000 vacancies and 30% churn rate, you know you've got a big problem. So we need to make sure it's properly hypothecated so the money flows to the right places. And then we need that proper career framework that will make best use of that funding.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Very, very clear. So we started talking about the living wage. So, Sebastian, would you like to pick up?
Thank you very much. Yes, so of course, we're going to start by saying it's brilliant news that the government is prioritising funding for social care. The Living Wage Foundation very much welcomes these recent announcements, and this additional funding is coming at a crucial time, as Kevin just mentioned, that care workers have been at the front line of the pandemic over the last 18 months plus, while caring for our loved ones and those we care about most, which is why now we believe it is the perfect time to for funds to be made available for care workers to earn a wage high enough to meet their everyday needs. So currently, according to Skills for Care, 73% of care workers in England earn below the real living wage, which is set according to the real costs of living. And the real living wage currently being at £9.50 an hour for the UK and a slightly higher of £10.85 for London. However, this isn't really just about workers or benefits to workers, it's also about business and the wider economy. As mentioned previously as well, with staff turnover rates as high as 34% in social care and vacancies, I believe, moving over 100,000, there is a definite need to attract and retain care workers. The voluntary living wage is actually a clear solution to this, or the real living wage. It is known to improve retention rates, and in fact, one care provider in Yorkshire, in the first year of implementing the real living wage, saw the turnover of social care workers fall to just 12%, with another in Salford see it fall to just 8%. So you can see some real changes there. But it's not actually also just about retention either. Improvements to pay also help motivate staff, and motivated staff lead to better quality of care, which in turn reduces admissions to hospitals, creating savings for the NHS. But these aren't actually the only economic benefits either, as the voluntary living wage has already put back £36 million into the pockets of care workers, which is money being spent in local communities. Now, as we all recognise and has already been mentioned, local authorities have lacked the necessary funding to cover the true cost of care as well as the voluntary living wage. And I think also, as mentioned before, there is indication that private care organisations are having to subsidise local authority care in certain circumstances. However, it has been calculated by the Institute of Public Policy Research that in order to provide the necessary funding for local authorities in England to pay for social care and for the voluntary living wage, it would require £445 million of going beyond current funding, which would benefit over 500,000 workers. Now, the additional spending would ensure that England isn't left behind when we're recovering from the pandemic, considering that already the Welsh and Scottish governments have made commitments to fund the voluntary living wage. Now, this funding would support the government's levelling up plans, enabling good, well-paid jobs in social care, which will help tackle unemployment challenges and support local economies, particularly in areas of the UK where there is a growing demand for but lack of care services. So with all this in mind, and what's already been mentioned by the panel, the Living Wage Foundation would welcome the voluntary living wage to be included in the upcoming Health and Social Care White Paper and the Comprehensive Spending Review. And we do ask that all those here and listening support our call for the voluntary living wage for care workers, and if there are any MPs present, to support this by writing to the Secretary of State and Health and Social Care. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sebastian. One of the voices we haven't heard yet is the hugely important voice of local government in the provision of care. So, Izzi.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Perhaps I just need to turn that a little bit. I want to just talk a little bit about the last 18 months, because local government have been fantastic in stepping up and supporting care in both in home care and in the provision of care homes, supporting our care homes in trying to get PPE when they needed it for their staff. Certainly in my case, we had a huge amount of activity in trying to help our care homes to keep supporting the most vulnerable people in our society. And actually, it's you and I in a few years' time. So just remember, what we're talking about today is what you're going to be inheriting tomorrow. And frankly, Damian, you said I'm greatly expert in this. I started because I had a mum that I was looking after. None of this is rocket science. It's our families that we're talking about. And what we want to do is support them in the very best way, because as local governments, it's the services that we provide that we want to ensure we're looking after people. We're providing a workforce that is empowered, that is paid, and sees opportunity and career progression. And at the moment, all the figures, I've got figures down here, and they replicate all the figures you have heard. The turnover rate, well over 30%. The issue about the differentials between the parity of pay between local government and social care and our health colleagues. They are doing very similar quality jobs, and they are looking after the same very vulnerable people. And actually, if we're going to protect the NHS, which we all desperately want to do, because we need it when we need it, not before we need it. If we're going to do that, we need to have the right workforce in the right place, looking after people in their homes, in their care homes when they're needed, getting them out of hospital quickly so they're not sitting in there occupying beds that they don't need to be in, and giving them a quality of life that we all are entitled to. So, currently, we have got 110,000 plus, actually, vacancies in the sector. We have a workforce that has been exhausted for 18 months. They have constantly looked after people who are very vulnerable, who are not getting their families and their support workers in there to look after them, and they have provided all of that, not just looking after them, but the emotional support as well. They're pretty traumatised, and actually they could go and do a lot easier job for a lot more money than this. Is that in our interests? Because I don't think it is, and I don't think it's what any of us want. And so we're now at a position where I really welcome the government having announced £500 million for training for our workforce, which is great, because we do need to give that career progression, the training that's needed, but we need to retain them. We don't need to spend £500 million on a 30+% turnover. We need to hang on to that staff and give them opportunities. And that's about ensuring there is that parity of esteem, that if you're a social care worker, you are valued just as much as you're a health worker. I think too that we absolutely need to encourage people into this profession, because it is a profession, it's very valuable, it's very worthwhile. We need to recognise that not only are we looking after older people at a critical time in their life, but actually increasingly we are putting workforce into people who have got long-term care needs, what is called working age adults. It is now nearly 50% of the spend in social care is on those who are working age adults, and they will have lifetime care needs. And if they're going to have any quality of life, which they absolutely must because their ambitions are just the same as ours, they need to have that support work and the quality support work, people who are valued as well. So for all of that, I'm concerned about some of the announcements through the recent announcements on social care money. We know it's tapered. It's not going to reach social care for some time. It's needed now because we need to stabilise the sector. My figures are we need right now £1.5 billion to stabilise the social care sector. If we don't stabilise it, the gap gets bigger. So I'm trying not to talk money, Damian. The chairman's asked us not to. But if we value this profession for the growing, ageing population that we are, and the growing working age adult population that we have, we need to value the workforce that we have now and those who we want to attract into the sector for the future. So they look after you, they look after your parents, and they look after your friends and family.
Thank you very much, Izzi. And our final speaker from the platform, as it were, or the table, is Chris Woodhead of Dimensions. Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And one of the risks of being the last person to speak is that everyone said what you were going to say. There's a couple of points I try and reiterate, though, and I'll try and stick to the brief of not talking about money. I think the first thing to say is that the overarching problem that we're talking about here is a supply of people. And social care doesn't really change even though technology does advance. It always has been, and open-minded though I am, I think always will be, about people with the right energy and the right values who care enough to make caring their living. You need great people to deliver great support. And that just isn't going to change at all. So all the comments that all the panellists have made, which feel very unified to me about trying to pump prime, promote that talent pool of people, are really important, and I support all of them. It's a very positive discussion to be part of. At Dimensions, we support people of working age largely, so people with learning disabilities and or autism. And our group strategy, which is called Better Lives for More People, you might be surprised to learn, isn't really explicitly about quality of support particularly, or about growing the business. It's not a typical corporate strategy. It's really all focused around trying to attract, train and retain the people we need to deliver great support. Because as I said right at the start, if we haven't got that supply, we can't do what we need to do. It's as simple as, really. And we try and use a bit of scale. We're a reasonably sized organisation these days, so we try and use our scale to, and what little surplus we make, it's about 2.5%, to invest in training, to try and improve the lot of people who work in social care. And we've got a good track record on promoting people internally and delivering those improvements, etc., etc. But it's hard at the moment. It really is hard. If I give you a flavour, I mean, Teresa gave you some fantastic statistics. I think, the organisation is tired. The pandemic has taken it out of people. I think during it, there was a real almost sort of wartime spirit. People just answered the call. It is now tired. There are colleagues who joined us because we were a port in a storm, frankly. Yeah? The employment market was flat. There was a job to be had. And some of them are leaving because it wasn't the right sector for them, or because, do you know what? They can get the same money knocking out flat whites in the local cafe that they can get supporting people who face real challenges and managing real risk. I think we're starting to see subsistence level support in some places as a result of this. I think Izzi spoke a bit about quality. for us, working age adults, all of our support is really designed to try and help people lead great lives. So it's not just domiciliary care or support with basic functions. It's about getting out and about, being part of your community, having a life plan that you follow. And of course, if the quality and supply of people who support them goes down, so do some of those visions cease to come to pass. The other thing I would just reiterate here, I think, is the symbiotic relationship with the NHS. I mean, these are two halves of the same yin-yang, really. You know, they are absolutely symbiotic. And I was going to badly quote Harry Potter and say that one cannot live while the other doesn't thrive, really. And at the moment, in Dimensions, I've got people who are waiting to come out of institutions, which is the NHS's long-term plan, but we can't do it because we can't appoint the people we need to support them. In some cases, we've got houses lined up for people to live in, but we just can't mobilise the workforce we need to do it. So the human impact isn't just about the workforce, it's about people that we are going to be supporting, and actually the NHS. So I just really would underline that symbiotic relationship. I think there is potential, as the plan suggests, around formalising training, professionalising the workforce, accrediting training, more bodies to give more clout to that training, to attract more people into the sector. I would readily support that. Non-local authority commissioning-based umbrella organisations to achieve that. But I do just come back to pay at the last element of it. There's a lot of modelling on pay. I appreciate that. It's an extremely complicated thing to try and understand in great detail. But I do know that at the rates we can afford to pay right now, we can't attract the people we need. I think the vocation is out there. I think there are people who care enough, but there are easier ways for them to make their living elsewhere, frankly. And so I do think that a system that stabilises pay, sets base rates, and in a sense does regularise the pay for the sector will be useful. Maybe it needs some regional variations because it's complicated, but regularisation I think is really, really important. Because at the end of the day, the people who are receiving the care and support deserve the best that we can afford to give them. That means attracting the best people, and that means rewarding them and training them for the devotion that they give to the people they support. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to all the panel for sticking to the time limits so admirably and unusually in respect to these panels, including perhaps particularly myself. I should say, incidentally, I apologise if I said we mustn't talk about money. What I meant to say, and hoped I'd said, but clearly didn't, was that let's not go over the row about how we raise the money. And clearly it's impossible to discuss pay without discussing the quantum of money that's needed to bring pay up to an appropriate level, as well as all the other improvements to the system which we've heard about over the last half hour or so. Anyway, I now want to turn the debate over to you, and I think we should start with a couple of questions from members of the coalition who have helped place out themselves on the front row to this purpose. So I don't know who wants to go first. But
if I could ask a question, that would be great. And it's a question for Gillian, please. So we represent Better Pay for Social Care, which is a partnership group of over 4,500 social care organisations, mostly providers who are desperate to pay their staff at least the real living wage. But how can we pay our frontline carers? Oh, thank you. I don't need to repeat that first, do you? No, thank you.
It's more for the people at the back, probably.
Okay. How can we pay our care workers a minimum of the real living wage as a starting salary when local authorities aren't getting sufficient funding coming through from central government? So we've created an infographic that are on some of the chairs at the table at the front here, using a charity, Autism at Kingwood as an example. The facts and figures here are real, they're not an invention, and it's an estimate that local authorities need to pay £20.78 an hour in order to pay the real living wage. Now, the hourly rates actually paid to Autism at Kingwood currently range from £16.39 to £18.40, and you'll see there, just to pay the national minimum wage, the charity should be getting £18.93. the numbers quite simply don't add up, and it's a struggle for organisations to pay, in some instances, the national minimum wage with everything factored in. The government have said before that the social care rates and pay is a matter between local authority and care providers. And I just have to say that that isn't right. A number of organisations are working at maximum efficiency. They're as lean as we can be, and you've heard from community integrated care and Dimensions already. Talented, caring staff are leaving our sector. We are having to face huge recruitment costs, huge agency costs that's making all the affordability much worse. So my question that I'll finally get to is do you agree that paying the social care workers a minimum of the real living wage should be an immediate priority in the government's Build Back Better plan?
Where am I? One of the things you find as the minister responsible for things is what would appear to be quite a simple question to answer is not a simple question. It's actually not even mine fully to answer either. But I think the first thing is we recognise the massive issues in this sector, and a lot of that is driven by the workforce issues. I sometimes look at some elements of the workforce and think, I think you're running more of a recruitment agency actually than a care business, and the cost of doing that and the waste in that element of the system, we talked about the interface between the health and social care service, the waste between that element of it, and these are all costs that are all being borne by somebody somewhere, and ultimately in government everything's borne by the taxpayer. So I think one of the most important things is, first of all, that this government is definitely taken what has politically been a very difficult choice that pretty much everybody for decades has dodged. To be fair, actually, we did try it in 2017. I think we all have the scars from that. But, you know, I think the fact that we finally gripped this issue is actually the most important first step. Now, the second thing that I think is really important is the role as defined, which is my role, which is social care, mental health and integration. Because actually the integration bit of the NHS and social care, making that work better, as you say, whether it's in a structure or whether it's just in the interfaces, is also going to massively, you know, release some of the value to the waste, to go into the value that the people are providing. And then also I think on the mental health as well, the mental health, either of the sector, and by the way, you know, all of us had huge admiration. My grandmother died just before the pandemic, for which actually as a family we were really grateful, because not being able to see your loved one was awful. But my friend and many people who I know worked in the sector actually moved in to look after the people that they were responsible for. I mean, the sacrifices that they made, actually, because they didn't want to be going backwards and forwards, and because they needed to be there, nobody else was there, was astonishing actually. And I think, you know, we all saw it, right? So it's. I understand the campaign. I think it's a valid campaign, and I think you should continue with the campaign. As Kevin said, you know, governments don't, and I know Chris might have a different view on this, but we don't set. I mean, we set the national minimum wage, which of course has gone up, and actually is not as different. It's not massive from the living wage now. I mean, we've closed that gap quite a fair bit. But what's going to really push this is the competition for workers at this level. And I saw this in my last job. So I was the Apprenticeship and Skills Minister. And, you know, the HGV drivers we all saw, right, but this is A, been going on for quite a few years, and B, is pretty much everywhere. And if you the reason we haven't yet been able to work through what it's going to look like is because a whole load of people have only just come off furlough. And the Chancellor would say, very honestly, well, look, we don't know actually where these pressures are going to be, because there's 1.5 million people who are just about to come off furlough, and most of them maybe won't be going back into their jobs because most of that would have happened already, and what's going to happen with them. So there's a little bit of that, you know, the pandemic, seeing how it all kind of flushes out, which I think is a reasonable thing to do. But I suspect that these pressures will continue, because the thing that is very clear is the ageing demographic, of which we all hope to be a part of, isn't going away. And it's only growing. And nobody, other countries have, but nobody in our country has actually sat down and said, we are going to design a social care system that is fit for purpose for the 21st century, that has, all the various options and the models, because that's the other thing. None of us want to even end up in a care home. Nobody wants to go there. It's like a lose-lose scenario. We want to go other places. We want to be at home. We want to, be cared for in our communities a lot longer. So we really do need to grip every aspect of it. And I am not underestimating the staff part of it, but it's actually only if we fix the whole lot that we'll really have a sustainable system that we'd all be very proud, not only to have delivered, but also to actually go into when we're older.
Does anyone else want to respond? Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, do I think care workers should be paid more? Absolutely, I do. And just the facts alone, aside from the fact the incredible commitment, especially commitment of the pandemic, but the statistics about 110,000 vacancies and 30% churn rate, you've got to be paid more. You can't do that without the funding, as I said earlier. So yes, absolutely, I think we should increase, the market itself should increase funding. You're not going to keep the staff unless you pay them properly, especially when you've got the market pressures like Gillian was saying on staff generally across the economy. Do I think the government should specify to lots of private sector companies and charities and lots of other bodies, you've got to pay this amount of money, some kind of national pay bargaining for the private sector? I don't think that. I think that would be the wrong thing to do, for lots of different reasons. But professionalising the sector, the framework for career development, the greater funding which will lead to higher wages and a more professional sector, absolutely agree with that. I think that's the best way to deliver the solutions you want to deliver for the people you represent.
Izzi?
So I'll try and be very quick. I mean, there have actually been a lot of attempts to try to find a solution, certainly for social care, not least of those Dilnot. And it has been an issue over all governments, all persuasions as well. I just think we're getting to a real critical mass on this one, and fudging it isn't going to help any longer. Over the last 10 years, the increased cost pressures are 8.5 billion in the social care sector, and actually the increase in money is 2.4 billion. So you can see the gap that's arisen. Arguably, I think social care, the squeeze on money has been the mother of invention to a certain extent. How you do more with less, it has been a necessity, and that's created new innovations. There's some fantastic technology stuff going on in care homes that is really helping to support people as well, about hydration, sleep patterns, all this. So, and actually, as you say, Teresa, we need money to do that as well, so that we spread that knowledge on a wider scale. The point is, most of the people who work in care and have that real ethos, actually their ambition is to go into health, because they can do better and earn more money there. And if they, if it's part-time, they'll go and make coffee. But this isn't helping us, because what we want to do is keep people out of hospital. They don't get well in hospital, they get treated there, they get well outside in the community with the support that is needed. And arguably, that gap has meant that 6.1 million has had to come out of the service, and 2 million has had to come out of other services which help to keep people supported independently. So there is a critical situation, and I think we just have to recognise that if we, and I will just say, this should never be a competition between health and social care. It should be about supporting both. But at the moment, it's rapidly becoming an increasing competition between health and social care. And I don't want to go into hospital. I'd rather be supported outside. And that means we need to have a workforce.
Thank you both. Okay. Hand it over. Gentleman there.
Thank you. All the panel have talked about a shortage of workforce and the fact that there are many more vacancies than people to fill them. I'd be interested in, and perhaps I shouldn't say this at a Conservative Party meeting, but what's the role of immigration in all of that? And can immigration play a role? And how would you facilitate recruiting from abroad?
Perhaps we should start with as it were, the practitioners. Chris or Teresa?
Within social care, a smaller proportion of our workforce is relied on immigration. But what we've seen is that the competing workforces rely heavily on immigration. So food factories, warehouses, what have you, with the pipeline of immigration being turned off, they are inflating their pay rates, and so the attraction of people to move from social care into those other into those other sectors has really, really ramped up significantly. That being said, I think there is a role for social care in terms of immigration, and I think it is an opportunity to bring skills into the UK. Working in social care isn't something that everyone can do. The skills are to be able to listen, to have true empathy, build rapport, be able to do a very boring job sometimes, a fabulous job at other times, and be able to react to emergencies and manage risk immediately is really, really quite tricky. And we're kidding ourselves if we think that there's a pool of everyone in the UK that you can fish from that has got those skills. I don't. And I am, overwhelmed by their capability every day. And so we need to find those people with those skills. And I don't think a lot of people have them actually. And so I think in the end we will need to fish in bigger ponds to find those people.
Nothing much to add to what Teresa has said. I mean, I spoke about vocation in my little bit. Really, I stick by it. To be honest with you, I mean, and we've seen that. I think with colleagues just leaving the sector after trying it. There's a bit of a thing in social care. I'm sure maybe people who know it. If you keep someone for a year, you've got a fighting chance of keeping them for longer. It's almost in that first year where you find out whether or not it's for you, because it really is vocational. And I think that underpins pretty much everything that Teresa has said. I support it.
Sebastian, one of the arguments always made is that if you allow immigration to fill gaps, then inevitably, particularly at the lower end of the labour market, you just drive down wages. Do you agree with that?
I mean, to be honest, from the Foundation's perspective, we don't have much research on that, so I can't really comment on that, to be honest, right at this point. We do work with sort of another charity, Citizens UK, who do work a lot with sort of immigration and sort of with communities. But yes, at the moment I wouldn't be able to really comment on that, unfortunately.
Okay. Gillian?
I think it's simple economics, actually, it's maths. I think it does happen. You have a look at over the last decade at wages, and it's clear, actually, that it has been a lever. One of the things, though, and I think it doesn't really get to the point, because it's almost like an inherent assumption that it's basically a warm body, right? But it's the vocational element and the skill to deal with elderly people, working age adults, with dignity and respect, particularly with dementia as well. That's obviously a growing need, and it is highly skilled. One of the things I saw when I was trying to turn myself from a business person to a politician, I'd done business for nearly 30 years, I became a governor on an NHS board. And the first meeting I went to, the team there told me about how they'd just come back from the Philippines to recruit nurses. And I said, what are you doing in the Philippines? And they said, well, we've already run out of Spain and Portugal. I said, why does any of that make any sense? Why are you not training the next generation? Did they not want to do it? Well, I knew they did because I'd already been to a meeting of the girl guides, the rangers, the older ones, who were pulling their hair out saying, we want to go into health or social care and we can't find an apprenticeship. Right? So I was the apprenticeship and skills minister before, and I did an apprenticeship myself. So I looked at the apprenticeships, and there was quite a few apprenticeship standards in all different levels up to, but there was hardly anyone on them. And so when I got the apprenticeship and skills, I got all the NHS trusts, and I said, what are you doing? Why are you going to all these places, which must cost a fortune, must be super inefficient, as well as whether it's morally right? And every single one of you got an opportunity that you're not providing to the next generation, and you need to do that. So we unblocked that apprenticeship system. We now have 18,000 apprenticeship starts. This is also something, we have a number in social care as well. And I think the answer really is to try and get these routes so that they can move between the routes with those interchangeable skills as well. And I think the sort of longer term answer is that. But being strategic and developing your talent pipeline takes time, and it takes investment, and it takes leadership. Finding and nicking people from, coffee shops to this, that and the other doesn't take any of that leadership, and we need leadership. So I personally think that we do need to challenge ourselves more on this, and we do need to invest and build that talent pipeline. One of the last things I'll leave you with is there's something new that we're doing, and I'm very passionate about this because it's my last job as well, the one I know better probably at this point, is things like T-levels, which are actually developing really professional vocational qualifications that are equivalent to A-levels, and there's one in health, and there's a number that cover a whole range of health. That is where we should really start, because once we build up that, a really good, highly trained professional is worth probably 5 that aren't. And I think that is when you look at the pay and you look at the value, that's actually where you get the equation. Anyone who's worked in anything where they've had to build their talent pipeline recognises that pretty quickly. And we just need to give this whole sector the breathing space with the focus that we're having and the integration work to make that case, and then also make the case obviously to make sure that we get all this levy as much as possible into the sector as well as the council sector. So yes, it does play a role, and it will play less of a role, but it's probably not. It won't be a damaging to the sector if we can really lead ourselves to where we want to be.
Thank you. Gentleman there was the next one.
Thank you. I have a domiciliary care experience to share. First of all, I welcome the white paper that's going to come about, and hope it's going to lead to effective and practical reforms. And I hope that the carers who provide a passionate, wonderful service are going to be at the heart of that white paper, and their needs are going to be taken into account. Now, coming back to domiciliary care, I think local authorities have, and I understand they're under a lot of financial constraint, but they've also been really straining the domiciliary care sector by offering 15, 16 pounds an hour rate. And I come from Peterborough, where cost of living is relatively high compared to Manchester, and you cannot expect to provide a compliant service at that sort of hourly rate. You're paying your carers, between 9 and 10 pounds an hour. Then you've got the on costs, and sorry, I'm an accountant, so I will talk about figures, and I apologize. And then you've got the on cost of compliance and making the carers compliant. So there's a lot of training that has to take place. And the gentleman earlier on talked about immigration. The problem with that is that it's not an immediate fix, because on average it takes about 4 to 5 weeks to make a carer compliant to be able to provide the care. Okay, that's if the language skills are already there. So I asked the local authority to actually take a more reflective and practical view of how the service is being provided at the on the ground levels, rather than just their own budgetary constraints, and loosen the budget a little bit and let the domiciliary care sector have a reasonable hourly rate in which they can provide that service. And the other problem we have is that a lot of carers don't want to have the vaccination. And obviously with the new rules coming into place, they're leaving the service. So that 110 or 12,000 vacancies are only going to be going up. And, something needs to be done about that too. And if I can just finish off by saying that I think, you rightly mentioned this is a recruitment agency rather than a caring agency. And the circumstances have been developed in such a way that we have become a recruitment agency and care is hardly there. But I also feel that, the regulator maybe uses a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And I think it's probably over-regulated for the domiciliary care sector. And maybe if the regulation could be, lightened a little bit, it might then make a better business model than it is at the moment. But I'll finish off by saying it's very hard to be compliant in domiciliary care to provide the care that is much needed. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a number of interesting points. Izzi, do you want to?
Certainly, the issue about the double vaccination is a matter of concern. And in my authority of Warwickshire, we think that represents about 5%. It's possibly not that, that bad, but 5% on what's already a gap market is actually not great. And what we're seeing, so this would be those people who are in a care home, because this has now come into place, so it's already there. What we have seen is, in those cases, they have moved into health where they can, because that's not yet ready to take that on, but it will be. And also they have gone into dom care rather than care home. So you can hang on to them for a bit, but until this comes in, then it's going to be across the board. On the issue about the about CQC, about the inspection regime, I'm kind of torn on that. I do actually think that it is important to have our quality and our standards and that reassurance and confidence that we can provide to families who put their loved ones into the care of people that they hope they can trust. So it's really important that we retain that. What I would say, in some really good authorities that I've seen, and these are conservative authorities, well-run conservative authorities, they have a very good relationship with the inspectors. They have a constant dialogue, and they have put highly qualified practitioners into a sort of standards support system that go in and troubleshoot if there's any issues. And this isn't inspection, this is a holding hands and getting people through a critical situation. So it can be supported, it can be done, and actually the important thing is to keep talking and keep that open dialogue, not just with care homes or domestic providers, but with the inspectors as well.
Thank you. Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Both last questioners mentioned immigration. I think one of them in the context of the Conservative Party conference. I've got to say, I mean, all Conservatives I know, and certainly the three on this panel, are not against immigration at all. What we wanted is control over immigration. I think most people will recognise that's the right thing to have control over immigration. Now, that control should offer the opportunity to widen that pipe as well as to narrow that pipe, depending on the needs. And I think we can all see within our economy at the moment, we've got some real pressures there. So we should be able to say, well, we do need more social care workers or more HGV drivers, whatever, and we should be able to open that pipe effectively. So definitely, I want to reassure you, there's nobody here that is more pro-immigration than the people sat on this panel, many other Conservatives at this conference too, quite rightly too. I think Gillian's right though, businesses have often taken, and I've been in business for 30 years and done this myself, the opportunity to take cheap labour rather than looking at really working our way, finding more efficient ways to work. I think that's got to be a challenge to to lay down for our employers, whether it be through apprenticeships or automation. That's pretty difficult in the social care sector. I completely see that. So the business can adapt to this new world effectively, given time. But time's critical, and I don't think we're there yet. And the final point, in terms of just your point on pay, again, the German system we saw, we didn't see any evidence that people in their system over there were too low paid, that they didn't want to work in the sector. The key is the local authority paying you 15, 16 quid an hour clearly is too low for you to pay a decent wage. We need to get that up, which is about proper funding for this whole system.
Gillian, do you want to?
Yeah, I think what you find when you're a minister, Damian, you'll know this, is you've got to put together a very strong case for investment of public money, and it's got to be almost watertight, right? So when you say, you know, we're actually running with a lot of waste, effectively, a lot of waste because of the fact you're recruiting continuously. And, you know, we know that there's the integration between various bits of the service doesn't work very well. Again, it all backs up to another area. You've got to put that case together, and it's got to be very robust, and that's what we've got to do. You know, quite often, I think Saj said it today on the stage, actually, I don't know if anyone caught his speech, we have to do the reforms as well as put the cash in. We just have to, and that's a responsibility that we all have. Now, I sense, and I've only been 2 weeks into this job, that everyone in the sector knows that, and everyone in the sector is up for that challenge. So that's what we have to do. But you can't fast track that, because you know, you've got to basically go to the Treasury, and as you say, you've really got to have, and that's because they, you know, it's not because they're mean. It's not because they're mean. It's because they've got a gazillion demands. They've got lots of demands, and effectively, you know, there's nothing in government, right? There's nothing that you couldn't fund more. So far, I haven't seen anything where, and they're all brilliant cases individually, all brilliant cases. But, you know, you've got to make sure that you get the reforms as well. And actually, I'll be honest, I don't think we are very good at challenging ourselves on reform and innovating. And I do think people stick to their lanes a bit too much and try and guard their bit of it. And, you know, that all has to change. But I feel that probably across the whole of the service, we're at that point where people are up for that and can see the upside in doing that. And I think this is just the start of what is going to be quite a lot of reforms that we will need to make. But I feel that we will be able to do the right thing. And the business case is there, right? You can even see it. You see it in all the waste. You can see it in, you know, the NHS is the carer of last resort, right? If if the GPs don't work as well, or the access to primary care, people go to A&E. If you can't get care at home or get all of the services that Izzi was talking about that you would prefer to have at home, then you've got nowhere else to go. You've got to go to the hospital. If you can't get out of the hospital because you've got nowhere to go, you're in the hospital. So this is, you know, you can see all around that is not working as well as it needs to. The whole system needs to work better together. So I feel optimistic. Don't underestimate the challenge, but I feel optimistic that the timing is right. And I'm glad that we've gripped it, and I'm glad that we're going to sort it out, but we're going to have to take those steps together.
Lady here.
Hello. My son, when he interviewed at Cambridge University, I think was a very proud day. But what they said to the medical science students was, go and work in geriatric care, because very often when you do something wrong in medicine, this is what you get. My son took that literally. At the age of 18, he went to work in a geriatric nursing home, and he went through his NVQ 1, 2 and 3, and he stayed for 10 years while he was doing his medical science degree and going on to do his master's. Why isn't there, looking at what he got out of it, why isn't there something within all those brilliant medical science students that need to do 6 months, a year in actually caring for the people that could end up as the result of what they do wrong.
Your son sounds an admirable human being, I have to say. Do you want to address that?
Well, actually, I mean, again, if you heard the Health Secretary's speech, that's what he did while he was at university. He did exactly that. I don't think he did it for 10 years, but he probably wasn't at university for that long. Yeah, I mean, actually, I had a meeting earlier on today. One of the positive things to come out of the pandemic, and actually in this sector, it's very hard to see the positive things because of the awful toll it took on elderly people in the first wave. But the volunteers and the voluntary sector, well, the amount of volunteers that came forward, and actually the app and the way that they organise that volunteers, because the big problem with volunteering, I've always wanted to volunteer, and I've always had like sort of big corporate jobs and stuff, but I was always really a bit frightened too, because I thought once I get involved I won't be able to back out, and then I'm going to be on a plane somewhere, I won't be able to do it. You know, this ability to just flex your time based on what when your availability is, that's something that we actually have as a legacy of the pandemic. And there's another factor which I think is very much underestimated, and actually the volunteers has been a great, you know, the work that volunteers can do. Somebody was talking to me and telling me about a problem they had with eye hospital, and it was actually the doctor in the eye hospital. He said, I'm sat there waiting for patients, and actually they never come. They don't come quickly enough. I have loads more capacity, and the problem is the processes that get the patients to me. The reason our vaccination programme worked so well was a load of reasons, but those people who stood outside and made sure from when you turned up to when you got your jab to when you left was minutes. And it was all the volunteers. Those processes of being able to be efficient, the efficiency of those processes, businesses spend all their time re-engineering, looking for shaving seconds off, shaving, you know, and we have got positions here where we've got the most if you actually designed and wrote the most inefficient process ever, you'd probably get some of the aspects of what we deal with today. So I think that's something, and a volunteering, I hope, is going to be a massive legacy of the pandemic for all ages, for all people. And, you know, again, you know, what's more rewarding than going in and, you know, talking to and keeping company, you know, people and other things, exercises and other things as well. So I'm just hoping that there's a real sense of community, and that's hopefully going to be a very positive legacy of the pandemic.
I'm a volunteer.
Yeah, I think everyone's a volunteer now, aren't they? Everyone is.
Yeah,
I am in our hospital. We're all volunteering for something.
I just wanted to say I really support that point. Adrenaline, I think, in organisations within and without, including volunteering, got social care, I think, through the pandemic, in truth, and probably large parts of the health service too, you know, of course. And my observations on volunteering over the years have been that there's latent potential out there in the population, absolutely. People often have time to give, but they don't really understand what role they could fill with their time. Whereas a call to arms like vaccination, brilliant. I know what that job is. I know what I can do, and I know what I'm doing exactly. And people do come running. And I do think to release that will be phenomenal for social care. I think it's got a massive part to play. I think the issue we face with it, partly, is about a positive narrative around social care, which I just think we struggle to synthesise or manufacture. I think, you know, creation of a ministerial role for social care is a brilliant move. It raises the profile of social care. The government increasingly talking about health and social care in the same breath and moment really, really helps, because it gives a certain momentum, and it supports professionalisation, I suppose. You know, it gives a more positive image to a sector, which is often, I think, for people identified with risk, frankly. And when we talk about the challenges in rewarding people, which are very, very real, that risk is luminous, isn't it? So I think there is something that comes from this just about relentlessly honing and making more positive the narrative. And the regulator has a role to play there too, as a driver for excellence, absolutely. But relentlessly honing and sharpening a positive narrative around social care. To my perception, the government is really trying to do something on that, which is positive. And that, I think, volunteering then can be mobilised and will yield more benefits for the social care sector. Not easy, takes time, I know it does.
Can I just add one thing to that, just briefly? But when I got the phone call about this role, and the Prime Minister phoned me up, he mentioned pretty much, you know, a lot of things that you said then, the importance of social care. And he said, you know, the ability to communicate and really communicate both to the sector, but also the importance of it, and also the trickiness of the policies and the finances as well, is a really, really, really important part of it, because there is, you know, it is important that the way we talk about it is changed and is much more positive, and that was a key part of the role that he saw, as well as, you know, fixing some of the underlying challenges that we've had.
Gentleman at the front here.
Yes, we met this afternoon.
Yeah. You're going to ask the same question. That'll make it
No,
easier.
I'm not going to ask. No. I'm not going to talk about my grandmother.
You've done 43 years in the industry. I remember that.
Absolutely, yes. I had chats with what's his name, Roy Griffiths, in those days. Will you remember then? Yes.
I remember Roy Griffiths.
Yeah,
I wasn't a member 43 years ago.
Well, I remember.
I just looked that old at the end of conference.
I was only a very young man. I didn't really know what I was doing. I said, "Oh, hi, I've just opened a care home. I've borrowed my nuts off. I'm taking loads of risks. I'm making things happen." And I thought, because I married a nurse, you see, that's how I got into care. And Roy Griffiths said, well, that's what we want. We want innovation. And you mentioned that earlier, because this is about social change. I mean, goodness me, I don't know how Margaret Thatcher would have coped with Facebook and social media and all the things that are happening now. It's a total different world. And in 1978, local authorities start funding all together. So we'd just done all this, and then suddenly we're totally private. Oh, my God. You know, that was before OMG was invented. And I've got young kids still. And they don't see, they don't want to continue in the business. My staff, I've got 158 staff. What I would like to mention is that no one said about how scared they are being in care. You don't go to prison if the toast is cold when you're doing bed and breakfast. You miss an entry, or you do something wrong, you know, you don't mean to, you leave someone on the toilet because you're desperate to get the taxi. You don't mean to do it, but it's quite serious, and they're scared of it. It's not just about the money. And my last thing is, my question, right, is can we look at smart staffing and tear the bloody rota up? Because at the end of the day, you do the rota, it's wrong from the minute it goes on the board, because people's personal lives are totally changing. And my churn rate is about 18 to 21%. We've got 158 staff. Our wages are the same as everybody else. Our rates, our fees are the same for private as social services. So when they run out of money, they don't get moved on. We do end of life. I was a member for 20 years, so I try and look at it. It's not just a business, it's a vocation.
Thank you.
And we've created a lot of beds over the years. And we want to be part of the system, not just the private sector all the time. Because there are some that are, you know, we take people in £1,000 a week, used to be, and they run out of money, and then we go on social services rates. But my conscience is clear, and I'm spending my spare time here with you guys, trying to make a difference.
Teresa, should we tear up the rota? How flexible can you be in practical terms?
Well, I think if you really want person-led care, then, you know, most of what we do is working age adults. If they want to go swimming on Wednesday morning, why can't they go swimming on Wednesday morning? Like, that's when you need staff there. So, person-led, which is absolutely what we aspire to, is just fundamental. So you do tear up the rota, but you also have to have the flexibility and have the staff in the first place to be able to tear the rota up, to have the flexibility in that. Because you need to be able to have that conversation and relationship with your colleagues so that you are both in it together, and the person supported wins, the colleague wins, and you have real flexibility in how you work. And you can use, we have an app on a phone, colleagues can bid for shifts, they can see when, you know, they can see when they're available. That's really, really important to be able to get that match.
Thank you. We've got two hands still up, and I want to take both of those, and then one last comment from each of the panel in order. So I think the lady up there first and then Bob.
Thank you. I am a social worker and I work alongside adults with learning disability and autism. Yes, it has been relentless. I've stayed in my role and I've redeployed into frontline services when we needed to. I think the difficulty for me, and I've heard a lot this conference about the longer term thoughts and the plan, and that's great, and we do need reform and people talk a lot about it, but we don't see much action. We seem to be going round the same loop. So great if you're going to take us out of that loop, Gillian, and take us somewhere forward, that would be great. I think what's more concerning is, Izzi said, we are facing a crisis. This crisis is coming. No, we're in it. So in my office last week, I was duty social worker, provider ringing up saying I've got 33 homes that I can't put people in overnight tonight. I've got no staff to staff those sleep-ins. We've got no hospital beds. We've got no domiciliary. We're waiting 18 weeks to put a domiciliary care package in. And we're now in a place where we're taking people out of their own homes and moving them into residential care. Not because they need residential care. These are young adults. My caseload is under 30. We're doing that because we can't provide care for them in their homes. And some of those packages are outside of my geographical area. And worse than that is adults with learning disability and autism, their mental health then deteriorates. And I had to be alongside a gentleman who was sectioned under the Mental Health Act last week, and I'm way up north, and he was going down south because that was our nearest bed. I also just briefly want to say about money and the false economy of all of this. The gentleman up front with the care home, every credit to you. I think that's so lovely to hear you say that about your rates, because we're in the free market where we've got one bed. There was 5 of us wanted it, me being one of them. My person got taken on assessment. Yes, I'll take your person. I said, right, is the rate's £3,000 for the week? That's our learning disability placement. No, 7.5. Because we can. Because we are being crucified for costs. They're just going up and up and up and up and up. So I feel like we're stuck in this false economy place where you're hemorrhaging money whilst debating whether we should put money in. So for me, I guess, long-winded way around to my question, I guess, is to say, when COVID hit, the government mobilised. We built hospitals almost overnight. We put money into furlough, we put money into this, money into that, money into that. Why? What is stopping the government recognising right now that we have a crisis in this country that is costing the government a fortune, and putting that money in right now to deal with this crisis, right here, right now, a 12-month package that goes directly to care, not to the NHS, and then whilst you've got that in there, deal with the reform and deliver the reform instead of putting it off. I feel like you're putting it off. It's we need money and reform, and while we're debating reform, we're not putting in the money, and you're actually costing us so much more. Never mind the quality of people's lives and the quality of the workforce. We are hemorrhaging because we're on our knees and we can't absorb it anymore. We can't work 5 staff down in my team. I'm working 5 staff down, logging on at 6 in the morning and off at 10 o'clock at night because you don't want to let people down. And then we're leaving because we can't cope anymore. So you're just making the situation so much worse by not acting now. It's a bit like a medical problem. If you deal with it early, you don't end up with it in a big... And I don't get it. What's the barrier? What's the issue? You could do it when COVID hit us. Why can't you do it now for social care?
Thank you very much.
Thanks. I operate, Chief Executive of a charity delivering vision impaired and deaf services across Surrey. And it's not going to be the same question as lunchtime, just so you know. I mean, I absolutely agree with a lot what that's been said about the rates of pay. And of course, that's very important, particularly for people who are sessional workers. And indeed, in my charity, we have, apart from those people who actually wanted to stay as sessional workers, everybody else is now on proper contracts. And that has worked very well for us and has reduced our churn rate. But I was particularly encouraged, Gillian, by what you said about the sort of the lack of a career progression. Because any of us who employ people know that salary is quite well down the list of the reasons why people will leave. So notwithstanding what's been said. But if you're a sessional worker and you want to do an MVQ course or even something more than that, then how are you going to do it? Because you just won't be paid. And I think we're on our 9th person we're putting through university for a qualification of social worker, rehab worker for the vision impaired, habilitation specialist for children, and now a counsellor who's just started a degree course. And the course for the social worker, a deaf lady who's going to become a qualified social worker, the second one we've done on this course at Kingston, it's now an apprenticeship. And that's great.
Yeah.
What I'm about to say, I know is not your fault. Okay, so
well,
I'm
that one is I did actually do that apprenticeship standard. So
well, yes, but it's not. The standard is fine. So it's now an apprenticeship. It was just a degree. It's 1 year longer. Okay, well, I didn't mind funding that. Surrey County Council were delighted to give us the amount of money they could do, because otherwise they'd be returning about £2 million to the Treasury. But the HMRC make it virtually impossible. It's really, really complicated. Too complicated for me. Fortunately, I've got clever managers, and it took 2 of them at least 2 days each to get through it, and a bit more that had to be done. It really, and I'm a former minister, and I know the junior minister, and I know that sometimes you think, we've done this marvellous thing, and another department's trying to make it not work. And I do think there is a real problem there. We could do it. Smaller charities in Surrey who would like to do that would never be able to achieve it.
Thank you very much. Given the constraints of time, I suggest we respond to those last 2 very powerful points, and anything else anyone wants to say from the panel, and I'll do it in reverse order. So we'll start with Chris.
Oh, heavens, thank you. I listened hard. I understood and recognised the points you both made. I think my summary point would be a bit of alignment to what you said, which is I think I support reform. I support and understand the complexities of it, but there is a now as well. And I suppose like any reform or administration, there will be some short-term levers, and there'll be some longer-term levers. And I guess it's just about how we sophisticatedly and sensibly collaborate around those to make them happen. To be honest with you, I'm very alive to the fact that things are extremely tough now, but I'm very supportive of reform.
Izzi.
Reform is something that I think local government has been doing for the last 10 years plus. I would desperately urge that it is possible to put money in before asking for reform, because we've just seen 12.4 billion going into the health service without reform attached to it, albeit it's come in afterwards. What I would just urge is it's so much cheaper in social care than it is in health. It costs you less to train a social care worker. It's quicker, and it will stop the drive into health. Actually, please talk to social care, not just health.
Sebastian.
Thank you. Well, I suppose, hearing the last few comments, I think definitely considering the last 18 months and the work that social care workers have put in, or care workers generally have put in, we do think now at the Living Wage Foundation that it is the time to act and put funding towards care workers, ensuring that they can, in part, receive the voluntary living wage, and putting that towards the, in the upcoming white paper would be really great to hear.
Thank you very much. Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, you can't solve any of these problems without proper funding package. That lady's question and amazing stories about her own experiences say everything, really. I think the difficulty is, why can't you just chuck more money in? 2.2 trillion reasons why, or 2.2 trillion pounds of debt, 100% of GDP. Office of Budget Responsibility say by 2060, because of demographics, social care be one of them, healthcare and pensions, our debt will be 400% of GDP if we don't change the tax system. So in today's money, £9 trillion. Completely unsustainable. So we've got to find new ways of doing the tax system. That's why hypothecation is right, just that I'm worried the Treasury won't hypothecate this money, so it won't come through to the system that does everything you want it to do. What Germany did, I'm going to go back there again, is they completely ring-fenced it in not-for-profit insurance companies. It didn't ever touch the Treasury, so they don't get their sticky fingers on it and put it somewhere else. That's what we really need to do over the next couple of years, and the money will come into the system then.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not supposed to be impartial. Teresa.
Social care workers doing their job with the skills that they have should be paid £12.63 an hour. So I support the real living wage, but it doesn't come close. And I think it's really important that we start to really think about what is going to happen next. Because what is going to happen next is a catastrophe. And we will start to see it, sadly, not in queuing at fuel pumps, but at people dying in a crisis in our hospitals. And so I am, having spent my life in business, utterly up for reform and innovation, smarter, quicker, slicker ways of doing things, and this sector absolutely needs it, but it's about to break.
Gillian.
So I think you put it very well. It's a false economy, but it's been a false economy for ages. So why has nothing happened? And the reason is, you know, the thing I've found is, you know, most people, despite what people think of politicians, they're not stupid people. They're not. They don't sit and stare at problems and enjoy watching them. The reason it's not been done is because, first of all, it's very hard. Secondly, it's quite unpopular on one level with voters. Let's be honest, it's been tried a number of times and it hasn't been very easy to do. In fact, it's been like a political hot potato. And all the reasons that Kevin said, you know, these are hard choices. That's why I think that actually we need to get behind what's happening now. And the reason is because for the first time in a long time, it's been gripped. And it's the start, and we need to, I completely agree with Kevin, we need to get ourselves in a position that cash, what we need of that cash, by the time it comes there in you know, the 3-year time, because it is actually now going to be there, what, you know, how we actually get it. Now, that the spending review obviously is going on right now, which the councils and everybody else has been pushing for, as fed into that. And there'll be aspects of it which will be local council tax, again, not particularly popular, but it'll have to be done to some degree. And the Chancellor will be making all those hard decisions. He's probably got the hardest job in the world, apart from you trying to make 5 social workers out of 1. But you know, this is tough stuff. That's why. And actually, you know, the reason I came into politics was, you know, not to admire problems, but to try and solve them. I think that's the reason that we've all got in common. And I really do feel that we have the right opportunity to do it. And the most important thing is that we all work together, and there's not a cigarette paper between us in terms of a very compelling, this is what we're going to do, and this is going to fix it. There's not also a single person in government on any side who doesn't want to fix this. Everybody sees, and it's not even just our issue, it's a global issue, and it's not been well solved anywhere really. And I don't know about the German system, how it's going to cope with the change in their demographics. I haven't looked at that, Kevin, although I will be obviously getting all the knowledge out of your head that you have acquired in this area. But that's the reason why. And sometimes, you know, you look at jobs, right? You look at sort of jobs in government. It's easier not to do it. In a way, it's easier not to do it. And that's what's happened time after time after time. But it's not what's going to happen now. And I think that is the most important thing, that we take this opportunity and we don't dodge it. The second thing, in terms of the social worker, the apprenticeships, I mean, I'm the only degree apprentice in the House of Commons. You could say I'm a bit of a fan. I loved the role as the apprenticeships and skills minister because of my own journey, because, you know, I was sat in a comprehensive school in Nosey wondering where I was going to get anywhere in life, and the apprenticeship was the thing that was the life changer for me. And it's a life changer for so many people, and it's also a life-changing second career. And there's lots of times that you'll want to have, this is my sort of second career, and I think there's a lot of people who would love a second career in social care, who would love a second career in health as well. And we need to really facilitate that. I don't know about the implementation. I've not heard that HMRC point before. But what I suggest you do is the Find an Apprenticeship site, you get your people to basically say, this is crap, this doesn't work, please sort it out. Because that is implementation. You know, we sit here and we think it all sounds perfect. And the reason I said to you earlier on, I want to have a round table with people from the profession is you actually get to hear about how well it has been implemented by listening to people who are actually doing it. And that's how I've always worked in business. It's how I like to work here as well. And I think, you know, but quite often, nobody will, I've never heard that. I was the Apprenticeships and Skill Minister for 21 months and nobody has ever told me that. So you need to tell somebody.
I didn't know until last month.
Right. Well, tell them not to tell you. Tell them to tell the Find an Apprenticeship person on their account.
Okay.
And I'll also feed it back.
Thank you.
Gillian, thank you. And thank you all for what's been a fascinating, passionate meeting. I should also thank the sponsors, Dimensions, Living Wage Foundation, the Avenues Trust Group, Community Integrated Care, and those who donated towards it, the National Care Association, the Social Workers Union, and Pay Better for Social Care. But I think finally, I should of course thank our 6 panellists who've given us a fantastic range of views, and I think it's been a really good event. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.